Oh, and we've got a camera here going to film it all too. This is a new addition to our parish kit. Got primarily because you're going to be hearing from an historian who's much more experienced than me in the parish lunch, Emeritus Professor Russell Stone. So we've got this little arrangement to preserve what he has to say about the Dilworths. And I had hoped that Hilary Reid would be able to be with us this morning. She is here. Hello. Hi Hilary. So Hilary is really the parish historian and has written the book that goes from 1847 through to 1981. And there's still copies of it for sale, $15. See me afterwards. And that is a terrific record of what has gone on over those years. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about it, but something that doesn't appear, not in this detail, in the book. So I thought it might be interesting to take you back in time, 175 years, to the very beginning of this parish, but seen through the lens of a young candidate for ordination, Thomas Biddulph Hutton, who lived from 1824 to 1886. He'd go on to make a very good marriage to Sarah Williams, the daughter of Henry Williams, the missionary. And it was in 1847 that he was made a deacon in September. Well, Hutton came to New Zealand in the early 1840s to teach at St John's College, which was not at Meadowbank at the time, but located in Waimate, which we call Waimate North now. When the college moved to Auckland in 1844, Hutton moved too. And this is a sketch that he made of his first residence in Auckland. Actually, it's not bad. If we come a few years earlier, it might have been a bit less salubrious even than that. As a young man, he sketched and painted prolifically, giving us a valuable insight into the early colonial period. So if you look him up through Google and takes you to the National Library, you'll see panoramas that he's painted from One Tree Hill and so on. In Auckland at St John's College, he multitasked. He taught, he farmed, was winnowing wheat and so on. He sailed. In fact, the letter that I'm going to draw upon today follows a sailing journey that he'd made with Bishop Selwyn on his boat. After when an outbreak of some fever had occurred in the college, and the bishop wanted as many of the healthy people to get away with it. So in some ways things haven't changed all that much in 175 years. And I think he was almost certainly involved in the carpentry work up at St John's College to make our first church. And if he wasn't, he was probably doing quite a bit of the donkey work down here, putting it all together. So he and all the other young people up there were attempting to make the college a going concern as a self-contained Christian community. That was really Selwyn's vision for St John's College. And that is actually, I think this is the schoolhouse that he would have first been in. It's apparently a converted barn, and it's dated 1845, which is when he would have been in Auckland. And there's a note that goes along with it that says that his study is somewhere to the right of a certain student. But that's the sort of building that they had there, that sort of semi-half timbered construction. So yeah, the letter that I'm going to draw upon now was dated 20th of May 1847, and it's got a section in it that relates directly to this church. And I don't think many of you will have heard it, so I'm going to give you the relevant parts of this letter now. Hutton writes, "A new wooden chapel," and this is John Kinder's, Dr. John Kinder's painting of that first church here, has been completed between the college and Auckland at a place where the Maoris encamp when they come to town to sell potatoes and pigs. The place is called Remuera. There will be a very large congregation of Pākehās, that is white people, as the suburbs of Auckland are fast extending towards us, radiating indeed by the sides of the principal roads from Auckland. This chapel is built after the same plan as our temporary wooden college chapel is being built, and that's a picture of that. So it would have looked very, very similar to that, really identical apart from the roofing. And the designer was Frederick Thatcher. And by the way, it's still going strong. Of course, many of you will have visited it. It's open during the week, and it's well worth a look in. You'll notice that it is a bit longer. In the 1950s, they extended out the seam, but they did it in a very thoughtful way. No ranch sliders or aluminium joinery. Now, the ground plan is as below. Hutton wrote. So, this is it's only about an inch in length, this drawing. It's just in the bottom corner of what is a very small letter. There is, he says, an apse, that's number 1 over on the left, at the east end of the altar, and a smaller one at the west for the font. 3-3, there are 2 transepts for the schools, which does highlight that this was also a place of education. He has 4 as a porch and 5 as a vestry. Now that's how it would have been at St John's College, but here it's the reverse. And at this point in the letter he offers an opinion on the baptistry at 2, which he did not like. The font was too hidden away. Now for a 22-year-old he had really quite strong opinions on how a church should look. He went on to say that the Remuera chapel is to be thatched, our college chapel is to be shingled. So imagine it with a thatched building, it would have leaked a little bit. Maybe not. Both built of kauri. That's that lovely interior of St John's Chapel. We can imagine that our one would have looked very similar to that. He says, which looks excellently well when daubed over with boiled oil, which has the double effect of preserving the wood and of deepening the colour. Then the beams and curved pieces are painted with this oil and a tinge of umber through which the grain of the wood is visible and which has a most pleasing effect. So he goes on to betray a prejudice that English colonists had for a long time, well into the 20th century, into the mid-20th century, namely that wooden buildings were inferior to stone ones. They said, we're looking around for all sorts of stone, we can't find good stone anywhere around Auckland, and we've got all this scoria, but it leaks, that sort of stuff he talks about. But he says, meanwhile, these aforesaid wooden edifices look well and not unecclesiastical. The planks are placed upright with battens nailed over the seams, just the way that this church now is built. And the beams are connected and the whole strengthened with curved braces so that it has not the flat look of a common slab house nor the uncouthness of a weatherboard. Apologies to all those who live in weatherboard houses. He didn't mince words on matters aesthetical. In 1847, but earlier, he sketched churches right around the country. And here's a concept drawing that he had for a church that I think must have had, at the time that he drew it, a hip roof. And they really weren't happy with that. The comment is, tower on a church, as it would be, were a remarkably ugly roof, as it has at present, taken away and gables put in its place. Archdeacon Brown meditates this change and requested me to put it so on paper. The east end has a door at each side of the window. Of what use they are, I do not know, as there's a large one at the south end through which most people enter the church, but there's no accounting for tastes. It's about 19 or 20 at that point. He's a very important person for recording, and we want to understand how all sorts of material artefacts were at that time. So there's a painting he made of the tyre half, for example, which shows that great detail, and his sketchbooks are just full of this sort of stuff. Okay, so you get a feel for the time and the thought processes that Hutton had, and probably shared by many who met in here to worship for the first time at the end of May 1847. They were pleased to be in a building that they regarded as transitionary, but carefully designed nevertheless, a bit like Cantabrians might think of the cardboard cathedral today. They probably expected that they would outgrow it quite soon, which they did, within about 10 years, and then the final church built here, they probably thought at that time, well before it reached its 100 years, its centenary, would be made of brick or stone, just like back home. From that time, 1847, this place was a centre of the community. I mentioned that it had the transepts for the school to meet during the week and church on Sunday. The role expanded, and within a decade, Hutton's prediction was realised. Remuera was taking off and a new church was needed. So the newfangled church that we are in was begun in 1861. You were in the oldest bit of it there, and kept growing for almost a century into the beautiful, inimitable church that it is today. This weekend, but particularly tomorrow, we will honour a foundational member of the church, James Biddulph, and his wife, Isabella Hall. And Isabella became a parishioner here from the time of her marriage in the 1850s. James contributed financially to many, if not all, of the building projects that took place here. I suspect that some of the more Catholic elements in the building he probably didn't back financially. Though he was not responsible for gifting the acre of the church itself, that was done by George Graham, the gentleman that James bought the Remuera farm off in 1848. He would go on to augment that gift in 1878 by creating a nature strip on the eastern boundary of the churchyard. That's a picture of it. And that's a picture of it after he planted it. He gave it for the purpose of planting trees and ornamental shrubs, and he got stuck into doing that himself. And by this period, which would be probably the early 1890s, the macrocarpus were really quite big. And I believe that not long before his death in 1894, he did agree to cut them down. Yes, it would have blocked a lot of that east sun coming into the altar area. And then another generous act was carried out really after his death by the trust that he established, which sold to St. Mark's that big piece of land on which the vicarage and the hall sit for £150, which was a very good deal at the time. Now, the Dilworths deserve to be honoured by us, not only for the benefits they brought to St. Mark's, but for the way that they used their wealth to provide for the education of disadvantaged boys. Surely that move was strongly influenced by the gospel message they heard preached here Sunday by Sunday, reminding them of the source from which all good things come and the purposes for which gifts are given us. So they'll now have a very nice brass plate on the wall of the church. It's just over there. They join the ranks of many people of renown who are immortalised on shiny metal plaques around these walls. In the world to come, it will be wonderful to meet these folks, but we should also expect to meet many terrific former parishioners of St. Mark Remuera who are not remembered on these walls. You who have been here much longer than me will know who some of them are. God certainly knows who they are. Now, at St. Mark's centenary in 1947, a short history was written which included some information about the way the foundation of the church we are in, this new church, came about. And I'm talking here quite literally about the building's footings. The information is as follows. The large scoria blocks on which the present building stands were, in the recollection of someone the historian trusted, the gift of a poor parishioner who excavated them from somewhere about where the railway passes at the rear of the church and deposited them on the site for the builders to use. Now, we don't have this person's name in print, let alone on brass. But if you stick your head under the church, it's still supported predominantly on these scoria blocks, which some of them are very big, which were clearly hewn by hand, before being supplied by the anonymous parishioner 175, maybe 176 years ago. Well, actually, no, not that long ago, about 164 years ago. And it really wouldn't have been an easy job, and I've done some gardening with scoria stones maybe that big, and I felt quite wrecked after it. So how they got those up here without the benefit of a bobcat or whatever, yeah. So I think that person, and probably his family, just as surely as James Dilworth was a foundational member of this church, and I think we could consider that person as a patron maybe of the unsung saints of St. Mark's, who listened to Jesus' words about what it is to be truly blessed and quietly committed themselves to that task. Thomas Biddulph Hutton, here he is, probably approaching his 50s. If he were to step out of a time machine into our churchyard today, I think he would be surprised to find that we still have a wooden church here. He might echo the opinion of one architect observer in a book I can't remember the title of for some reason, who said that the tower spoils the look of a Selwyn church. But he would still encounter a church that is alive and looking forward to its next 175 years. And a group of parishioners who love the wooden church building that they are in. So for all of these things, we give thanks to God today.